Nikola Jokic and the touch he uses here as he gets the MVP chant from this home crowd.
Someone in a front office said this to me at Summer League, and I just hadn't heard it verbalized like this. I think Jokic might be the best offensive player in the history of the NBA. I think that's on the table now for me.
This isn't just another NBA game. This is a 20-year-old defensive phenomenon going head-to-head with the most unstoppable offensive mind in basketball. One player protects the rim like a fortress. The other breaks defenses like a chess master. And when Nikola Jokic faced Victor Wembanyama, the numbers didn't just shock the league, they forced everyone to ask one dangerous question. Is there actually anyone in the NBA who can stop him? He waddles. He has no six-pack. He doesn't look like an NBA player. He looks like your accountant who plays rec league on Sundays. And yet, on a night when the greatest defensive season in a generation was fully locked in and ready, Nikola Jokic dropped 48 points, 13 rebounds on 63% true shooting with 0 turnovers. Let that sit for a moment. Not against a replacement-level center. Not against a team phoning it in during a meaningless late-season game. Against Victor Wembanyama, the most physically terrifying defensive presence the NBA has produced in decades, playing at full intensity on a team that had just won 26 of their last 27 games. How is this man still the most unguardable player alive? That is the question this video is built around. And here's the part that makes it even more extraordinary. An anonymous NBA player told a reporter this offseason that Jokic might be the best defensive player in NBA history. Not this era, not this generation, history. By the end of this, the goal is not just to explain how Jokic does it. It is to explain specifically and precisely why Wembanyama cannot stop it, and what that means for the MVP race, the playoffs, and the next decade of NBA basketball. And before we break down exactly how this matchup works and why it keeps producing historic performances, if you're new here on Hoop Action TV and you love real NBA analysis like this, we're closing in on 1,500 subscribers. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this video with a friend who lives and breathes basketball. Before breaking down the mechanics of this matchup, the context needs to be established, because what is happening between these two players right now is genuinely historic, and treating it like a regular season footnote would be a mistake. Nikola Jokic is currently averaging 27.8 points, 12.9 rebounds, and 10.9 assists per game. Only twice in NBA history has any player hit those marks across a full season: Oscar Robertson in 1961-62 and Jokic himself last year. He is also on pace to become the first player ever to lead the league in both rebounds and assists in the same season, ahead of Chamberlain, Russell, Robertson, and every other center or playmaker who ever played this game. That is not hyperbole. That is the statistical record. On the other side, Victor Wembanyama is putting up 24.7 points, 11.5 rebounds, and 3.1 blocks in just 29.2 minutes per game, and he is tracking toward becoming the first unanimous Defensive Player of the Year in NBA history. When Wemby is on the floor, the Spurs' defensive rating competes directly with OKC's historically elite defensive numbers. San Antonio has won 26 of their last 27 games with Wembanyama active. This is not a rebuild anymore. This is a legitimate contender announcing itself to the rest of the league. These two players represent the most fascinating structural collision in the NBA right now, a generational offensive mind against a generational defensive force. And every single time they share the floor, the numbers explode. In their last 3 meetings alone, Jokic averaged 37 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists on 62% true shooting. Against that defender, against that defense. Numbers that by any reasonable analysis should not be possible. Saturday's game was not just a regular season game. It was 2 red-hot teams, 2 MVP-caliber players, and what many analysts immediately labeled the duel of the year. And Jokic walked out of it with 48 and 13 like he had just finished a light practice session. The individual matchup cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the bigger conversation surrounding it, the MVP race, because it directly shapes how the league, the media, and even the players themselves view what Jokic is doing this season. The Athletic ran an anonymous player poll this year, and the results were striking. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander nearly doubled Jokic's support among active NBA players. Wembanyama, despite making a direct and detailed public push for the award in late March, which moved the oddsmakers and generated massive media coverage, did not crack the top 5 in that same poll. One player, when asked about Jokic, said simply, "He's probably the best player on the planet. He's phenomenal." And that player still voted for someone else. The Kia MVP ladder had Wembanyama at number 1 as recently as April 3rd, following back-to-back games where he combined for 82 points, 15 consecutive wins when he took the court, and the unanimous DPOY award essentially locked up. The player poll told a different story, one that reflects the complexity of a historically stacked MVP field, where even the strongest individual performances get compressed by narrative forces outside any player's control. Then there is the voice of social media, which in real time has become one of the most accurate barometers of how basketball conversations actually move. Clearly Hunter posted, Jokic literally outplayed both Shai and Wemby this year. At Nikola Jokic doubled down, arguing that in any pure talent discussion it is Jokic over everyone, no debate, no close call. At Techvivio called it directly, Jokic statistically might be the best player in the league again. The deep irony at the center of this entire conversation, the player putting up arguably the most statistically dominant season anyone has ever produced is still considered the runner-up for the award. That is the Jokic reality. He operates in a space where his brilliance has become so consistent, so routine, that it stops registering as extraordinary, even when the numbers are historically unprecedented. Wembanyama's superpower is not just his ability to block shots. It is his ability to psychologically erase the concept of going inside against him. Players who operate near the rim against Wemby face a simple equation: hesitate and he erases you. Commit to the move and he still might erase you. His combination of length, timing, and instinct has turned the paint into a dead zone for virtually every player in the league. Nikola Jokic does not care. His response to Wemby's paint dominance is not to go around it, not to settle for threes, and not to avoid contact. He goes around the concept of rim finishing altogether. Floaters from odd angles, soft hooks off the wrong foot, off-balance flips that have no business going in. And the numbers on these shots, specifically against Wembanyama, are staggering. 71% shooting on paint shots outside the restricted area, generating over 11 points per game from those exact looks. The critical distinction here is not that Jokic is getting lucky with difficult shots. These are not desperation heaves. They are repeatable, high-efficiency reads built into his offensive system. He has drilled these finishes for years. He knows which angles produce the most space against which defensive profiles. Against a shot blocker of Wemby's caliber, most players adjust by moving further from the rim. Jokic adjusts by finding the precise spot that eliminates Wemby's timing advantage while still maintaining a high percentage look. Nobody else in the NBA operates this way. There are players who have floaters, there are players who have hooks, there are players who can finish in traffic, but Jokic combines all three with the feel of a billiards player reading angles, and he does it faster than any 7-footer has any right to. At Techvivio nailed it. Jokic statistically might be the best player in the league again, and this touch in the paint is the single biggest mechanical reason why. Wembanyama's length is generational, but it only works if the offensive player gives him time to deploy it. 1 second of hesitation and Wemby has already recovered, already rotated, already positioned himself to contest. His ability to cover ground and close out on late developing plays is unlike anything the NBA has seen from a player his size. Jokic eliminates that second entirely. The way Jokic processes and executes is not just fast in the conventional basketball sense. It is fast at a level that removes the premise of Wemby's defensive advantage. He reads the defense before the play develops, identifies his action, and the ball is already leaving his hand before Wemby can fully load up for a contest. There is no catch and survey moment. There is no extra dribble to get comfortable. The read and the release happen in a compressed window that simply does not give Wemby time to operate at his ceiling. The result of this is one of the more counterintuitive statistics in recent NBA history. 17 points per game on 66% true shooting when directly guarded by Wemby across these matchups. Wembanyama does everything right: correct positioning, correct rotation, correct timing, and Jokic scores anyway. Not because Wemby makes mistakes, because Jokic has structurally removed the space in which Wemby's defensive excellence normally produces results. That number, 17 points per game on 66% true shooting when directly guarded, is genuinely insane. It belongs in the conversation about individual offensive dominance in any era of basketball, not just the current one. Wembanyama's default defensive posture is built around anchoring near the rim, protecting the paint, and functioning as the last and most devastating line of defense. That positioning is rational, it is where he is most impactful, and it is the foundation of the Spurs' entire defensive identity. Against virtually every team in the league it works. Jokic's jump shot turns that rational instinct into a structural liability. The pick and pop is the simplest version of this problem. Wemby drops into rim coverage to protect the paint, Jokic steps out to the elbow and knocks down the mid-range jumper. The Spurs adjust, same coverage on the next possession. Same result, there is no correct defensive answer to a 7-foot center who can hit that shot with the consistency Jokic does. But the inverted pick and roll, when Jokic operates as the ball handler, is where this gets truly complex. Wemby goes under the screen to stay paint side and protect against the drive. Jokic pulls up immediately from mid-range and hits the jumper. Next possession, identical setup, except this time Jokic reads Wemby's positioning and punishes with the feathery floater instead of the pull-up. The shot selection changes. The result does not. This creates what amounts to a binary defensive impossibility for the Spurs. Stay near the rim and Jokic scores from outside. Step up and the paint is completely exposed to Denver's cutters, rollers, and secondary actions. There is no right answer. There is no defensive configuration that simultaneously addresses both threats. Jokic has built his offensive game specifically to create and exploit this exact binary, and no team in the NBA has found a consistent answer. Strip away the individual scoring numbers and something more sophisticated becomes visible. Jokic does not just beat the defender in front of him. He relocates the entire defense until it breaks, then punishes whichever piece ended up in the wrong spot. The sequence that best illustrated this in Saturday's game: Wemby steps up to help on a drive, the correct defensive decision, the one any coach would call for. Jokic reads the rotation instantly and slides to the corner. This forces a closeout from a weaker defender rather than Wemby. Now Jokic has a mismatch. He backs that player down into the post, drawing Wemby back into rotation. The defense is now fully committed, and Jokic fires a kick-out pass to Aaron Gordon for a wide-open look that results in a massive 4-point play. Late in Saturday's game, with Wemby trailing in open space and the Spurs defense scrambling to compensate, a second defender was sent. Jokic immediately found Aaron Gordon for the game-tying dunk. He did not need to pause and survey the situation. He already knew where the defense was going before it got there. The NBA.com Kia MVP ladder described it this way: from an offensive standpoint, it's hard to make a case for any other player having a larger impact on his team than Jokic. That statement is not about scoring volume. It is about what happens to an entire defensive structure every single time Jokic touches the ball, the rotations that break down, the positioning that gets distorted, the help coverage that collapses on itself and leaves somebody open. This is not basketball skill in the conventional sense anymore. This is manipulation of defensive systems at a level nobody else in the sport operates at. The quote from the transcript is accurate. From an offensive standpoint, it's hard to make a case for any other player having a larger impact on his team than Jokic. And Saturday's sequences are exactly why. Individual brilliance explains how Jokic wins individual possessions. But the deeper structural question is why the Spurs, as an organization, cannot build a defensive system that contains him, even with the most gifted defensive player in the league as their centerpiece. The honest starting point: what has actually worked against Jokic? Who has come closest to slowing him down, and how did they do it? Last year's Clippers provided the clearest answer, specifically Ivica Zubac. What Zubac offered was not length, not quickness, not shot blocking. It was size and base. The physical mass to hold ground in the post, to make Jokic work for every inch, to force him into positions where his touch advantages were marginally reduced. Jokic still produced, slowed down, is always doing a lot of work in this context, but Zubac represented the closest thing to a workable individual answer. The 2024 Timberwolves and OKC Thunder operated on an entirely different philosophy, and it is the philosophy that comes closest to a real blueprint. Layered, wave-based, system-level defense. Two big lineups with a physically strong 7-footer absorbing post-punishment, KAT Hartenstein, combined with a roaming help defender lurking behind Gobert Holmgren to permanently crowd Jokic's reads and clog passing lanes. The lesson from both teams was identical. It has never, not once, taken one elite defender to slow Jokic. It always takes a full system working together. This is why the conversations that emerged around Rudy Gobert supposedly failing to stop Jokic always missed the point. As the transcript from a respected analyst put it, nobody is stopping Jokic one-on-one, and expecting that is just setting yourself up to be disappointed. The question was never whether any individual defender could contain him. The question was always whether a team could construct the right systemic environment around that defender. The Spurs have not done that, and the roster analysis makes clear why. If Wembanyama is not guarding Jokic, and sometimes he cannot be, based on matchup flow and defensive assignments, who is? The honest answer is nobody on the current San Antonio roster. There is no Alex Caruso type, a defensive pest who plays multiple inches above his height on pure IQ and effort, who can survive mismatch situations and disrupt Jokic's rhythm at the point of attack. There is no second true big who can be deployed alongside Wemby, freeing him to function as the help defender and roaming shot blocker where he is actually most dangerous. There is no physical 6'8", 230 lb forward capable of absorbing post-punishment as a buffer on the rare possessions where keeping Wemby on the perimeter makes tactical sense. The Luke Kornet 2 big experiment exists in theory. It has been tried in limited stretches. It wrecks offensive spacing, destroys lineup flow, and functions at best as a last resort in a playoff series, not as a real systemic solution. It is a desperation option, not a plan. The devastating conclusion from all of this: the Spurs are forced to put Wembanyama on Jokic as the primary defender, and that is exactly the scenario Jokic prefers. One elite individual defender instead of a swarm open space behind rather than a layered system. Reads that he can process quickly rather than waves of defensive coverage forcing him into longer decision-making windows. Jokic versus one great defender is not a challenge. It is his ideal working environment. At TechVivio captured the broader dynamic precisely. The Spurs' entire identity runs through Wemby on both ends, and against Jokic, that identity gets systematically dismantled at every level. Comparing Jokic's experience against OKC versus his experience against San Antonio makes the structural problem immediately visible. Against OKC, Jokic faces 5 defenders moving as a single connected unit. Strong post bodies making him work for position. Elite rim protection behind. Help cascading from everywhere the moment he catches the ball. Passing lanes permanently crowded. Every read he makes is met by a second level of defensive pressure before he can fully execute. The Thunder do not ask any individual defender to stop Jokic alone. They build a system in which no read he makes produces an uncontested finish. Against the Spurs, Jokic sees one defender in front of him and open space behind. The help rotations are slower. The second layer is thinner. The physical reinforcement does not arrive in time to change the outcome of most possessions. There is a telling flip side to this contrast. When Wemby faces SGA and OKC, the Spurs' defense actually performs at an elite level precisely because Wemby can roam freely off weaker shooters, crash into Shai's drives as a secondary body, and make OKC's offense genuinely uncomfortable. The Nuggets neutralize that completely. They pull Wemby into the action, force him into constant decisions, and transform his greatest defensive strength into something Denver can scheme around rather than something they need to avoid. In a potential playoff series, this structural gap becomes the central question. The Nuggets are locked in as the number 3 seed, with a likely first-round matchup against Minnesota, a team that has shown the closest thing to a working blueprint for containing Jokic. But if Denver advances past that, the Nuggets-Spurs series becomes the most structurally fascinating chess match the playoffs could produce. At Casual Chaos Live already has Jokic and Wemby listed as top finals MVP contenders. The market is pricing in this collision happening. The Spurs would need to find a systemic defensive answer they have not shown once this regular season. Without that answer, the outcome of a 7-game series is not particularly difficult to project. Jokic's averages this season are higher than his averages in his most recent MVP season, which means 2025-26 might literally be the best defensive version of Nikola Jokic the NBA has ever seen. He's doing it while Aaron Gordon, Peyton Watson, and several key contributors have missed significant time. Denver is 52-28 on his back, built around his ability to carry the offensive load on nights when the surrounding cast is depleted. 37 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 assists on 62% true shooting against Wembanyama, against one of the greatest individual defensive seasons in modern NBA history, is the kind of number that should end a debate before it starts. One player in the anonymous poll expressed it plainly. He's the best player on the best team. What more do you have to say? And yet SGA nearly doubles his support. The voter math does not reflect the statistical reality. That gap between what Jokic is producing and how the award race has evolved around him is the central tension of this entire MVP conversation. Shai's case is real and must be acknowledged directly. 140 consecutive games with 20-plus points, a record that passed Wilt Chamberlain's mark on March 12. A 64-16 team record, playing without Jalen Williams for 47 of those games. By traditional MVP metrics, team record, volume scoring, consistency, SGA has built a legitimate and strong argument. But as Nikola Jokic put it, in pure talent discussions, it is Jokic. The voters simply will not reward a 4th MVP to a player on a team finishing 3rd. That is the honest political reality of this race, separate from the statistical one. Wembanyama's public push for MVP in late March was not a casual or offhand comment. It was a direct, detailed, organized campaign that moved the oddsmakers, generated the kind of attention that forces voters to reconsider their positioning, and reframe the narrative of the race at a critical moment. The player poll told a different story. He did not crack the top 5. That is not an indictment of Wembanyama. It is a reflection of how historically stacked this MVP field is. In any normal year, a player with Wemby's statistical profile, team record, and defensive dominance would be a consensus frontrunner. In 2025-26, he is a compelling 3rd option at best. The Kia MVP ladder had him at number 1 as recently as April 3rd, 82 combined points in back-to-back games, 15 straight wins when he plays, unanimous DPOI essentially wrapped up. By every visible metric, the argument was valid. The voters are simply not going to give Jokic a 4th MVP, and Wemby's team finishes behind both SGA and Jokic. SGA wins the award, but the real story, the one that matters beyond the trophy, is what Jokic is doing that no single award properly captures or quantifies. The entire matchup history between these two players needs to be understood through one specific lens. Victor Wembanyama is 20 years old. He was already generating historic statistical lines against Jokic in his rookie year, before he had settled into his body, before he had 2 full seasons of NBA experience, before he had become the DPOI candidate he is today. The trajectory from that rookie year baseline to where he stands now is steep and continuous. There is no indication of a plateau. Steve Kerr said of Wembanyama this week, he looks like he knows exactly what to do on both ends. He doesn't look young anymore. He is 20 years old. If Wembanyama is already producing at this level, a unanimous DPOI, genuine MVP conversation, 26 of 27 winning streak as the engine of a contending team, the reasonable question is not where he is now. The reasonable question is where he is in year 4 or year 5, when the physical development is more complete, when the defensive system around him has been properly built, and when he has accumulated the specific experience of competing against Jokic across multiple playoff series. Wembanyama's ceiling in this specific matchup is not just about his individual development. It is directly tied to San Antonio's ability to build the systemic defensive infrastructure around him that teams like OKC have built around their own defensive identity. The variables are knowable. If the Spurs acquire the right physical big, someone with the mass and base to absorb post-punishment and function as a second defensive layer, Wemby can begin operating in his optimal mode, roaming as a help defender rather than anchoring as the primary coverage assignment. If they add the right defensive pest at the perimeter, the player who disrupts rhythm at the point of attack and survives mismatch situations, the coverage gap that Jokic exploits with his decisiveness becomes narrower. If the structural pieces arrive, the entire dynamic of this matchup shifts. That is not a prediction. It is a statement of conditional logic. The roster construction is the variable that determines whether Wembanyama ever finds the answer to Jokic that no individual defender has yet found. Right now, Jokic has solved more of this puzzle than Wemby has. That is not a hot take. That is what the numbers from 7 meetings, 3 seasons, and 1 historically dominant performance after another confirm. But Wembanyama keeps evolving. He comes back to each meeting with adjustments, with new wrinkles, with evidence that he has processed what happened and developed a response. The trajectory is not flat. The question that genuinely has no answer yet is whether this is a rivalry where one player holds a permanent stylistic edge, the basketball equivalent of a tennis matchup that always goes one way regardless of overall talent, or whether Wembanyama is building, possession by possession and game by game, toward the answer that no other player in the sport has found. Jokic is the greatest offensive player alive. His 2025-26 season may be the most complete offensive season any center has ever produced. He can finish through Wemby's shot blocking with touch that defies explanation. He eliminates the time Wemby needs to deploy his greatest weapon. He creates a defensive binary that has no correct answer, and he manipulates entire defensive systems at a level the Spurs are not currently built to counter. Those are the facts. We are watching the early chapters of something that is going to define the next era of NBA basketball. The fact that Wembanyama has not solved it yet is not a failure. It is a reminder that he is 20 years old, operating against the most sophisticated offensive mind the sport has ever produced, and still, he keeps coming back. That is what makes this terrifying, not that Wemby is losing. That he is losing now, at 20, against Jokic at his absolute peak, and he is already this close to changing the conversation entirely. What happens when those two facts collide in a playoff series with real stakes over 7 games? That is the question nobody in the NBA has an answer to yet. And it is the reason this rivalry, in its early chapters, is already the most compelling story in basketball. If this rivalry taught us anything, it's that we're watching the beginning of something special, a battle that could define the next era of the NBA. So if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you subscribe to Hoop Action TV, like the video, and share it with someone who loves basketball as much as you do. We're just getting started. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Victor Wembanyama will eventually figure out the solution to Nikola Jokic, or will Jokic always have the edge in this matchup? Drop your answer in the comments and share this video with another NBA fan to see what they think. If you enjoy real NBA breakdowns like this, you'll like what's coming next.